Road Closed by Richard L. Elsliger. Chapter 1. I bet I can make it. I bet you can't. Steve Cole took another swig of hard rye and leaned his elbow on the bar, wondering if he really could. It's all BS anyway, said Cole. The highway's just a highway, just asphalt and a yellow line. There's nothing magically dangerous about it, a couple of bad curves is all. My car'll handle it. Dan Mitchell looked him in the eye. First of all, the line on that particular road is not yellow, it's white. The manual on uniform traffic control devices mandated the conversion to yellow lines in 1971. Even then, some states took a while to change. I happen to know YDOT wouldn't touch this road, so the painted line on Highway 187 stayed white, thank you. Do you always have to bring your job with you everywhere? White line or yellow line, that won't stop me from getting to the end, said Cole. Want to make a bet of it? Put your life on the line? The white line in this case? Dan flung a quarter on the bar and watched it spin precariously before flattening itself out. Bet? Said Cole. Furrow lines etched his forehead. Steve Cole's eyes narrowed and he considered the idea. To bet on one's life. Now that would be a bet on himself, laying his driving skills wide open on the so-called white line. Sure, I'd bet my life on it. Now what about you, then? Dan picked up the quarter and stuffed it in his denim pocket. I bet someone's going to die if we try. Getting scared, Dan? Or maybe you don't have the driving skills you once had in high school. Yeah, maybe your reflexes are a little slower these days. You're full of crap, Dan retorted. I have the reflexes of a cat. Steve gulped the rest of his drink and slammed the shot glass face down on the bar. Okay, so you're in then. Steve saw a nervousness sweep across Dan's face he'd not seen in his friend until now. US 187 was an old highway. It was an abandoned highway. Newly constructed in the late 1920s, US 187 hadn't been driven since its decommission in 1982. The state of Wyoming had declared the old road off limits, leaving the 100-mile stretch to the perils of decay and the overgrowth of weeds. No one drove 187 anymore. Not ever, and people told stories. Some said the road was haunted. Others said it was poorly engineered by the government, but all agreed that a cruise on Route 187 meant a high probability you'd come out the other end in a body bag. Over the years, only a handful lived to tell the tale of what they'd seen, and what they told was incredible. Steve snapped his fingers in Dan Mitchell's face, zapping him out of a near catatonic trance. Relax, Dan. The stories you've heard about 187 are myths. They are, how shall I say, BS? Steve ran his finger along the bar in a zigzag, running a miniaturized version of the infamous road. It's only a highway, Mitchell. What we really need is to get more people if we're going to make it a true road race, a real challenge among men and machines. This is insane, said Dan. I swore I'd never do this. You can do all the swearing you want after you complete the run. First one out the other end wins. Steve made a closed fist at Mitchell, shaking it in the air like a man obsessed. And you can bet the first one to finish will be me. Not so fast, said Mitchell. My Camaro will seriously impede your rush to the finish line. I put a cross-ram intake manifold on her, so now she's faster than a ray of golden sunshine. If I choose to run this thing, I'm running it with my bow tie on. What's with the literary talk? Asked Cole. Are you writing a book? Yes, said Dan. A cookbook on kicking the living crap out of a Boss 302 Mustang using a Z28 Camaro. Dan formed a wide, disturbing grin. Steve's cheeks reddened at the thought of Dan's Camaro outrunning his Ford to the finish. He had to counter that boast. My Mustang will shut you down before you reach the halfway point. Your overconfidence will go up in smoke as sure as your engine burns oil. Classic Chevy Ford battle, said Dan, his mood lightening and his mind temporarily forgetting the peril of the highway. So who else can we get? Steve rubbed his chin in pensive thought. What about Tommy Hicks? I know he'd run it. He's got that fancy Plymouth Superbird he's always waxing and bragging about. What, are you trying to make it a parade of old American muscle cars? Said Dan. Mitchell tapped his fingers on the bar, trying to visualize a cavalcade of old American coupes and fastbacks racing to their doom on 187. Who else do you think is crazy enough to do this? He asked. Steve fumbled for another entrant, then said, What about that Dodge boy? What's his name? The one with the '70 Challenger? Bobby Caldwell, suggested Dan. You mean the Challenger with the 440? What makes you think he of all people would want to run to his death on 187? He of all people, Steve. He of all people. That's why we have to sweeten the pot. These guys have money. You have money. Let's make it for money, the big motivator that drives us all. Let's make it 25 large, said Steve. You mean 25 bucks, said Dan, smirking. You know what I meant, said Cole. 25 grand, you dummy. Don't be a smartass. What makes you think Hicks and Caldwell will agree to it? That's a lot of coin. Hell, that's a lot of money for me. They'll do it. As for you, sell some of those stocks you've been sitting on or endorse them over to me when you lose. When I lose? How's that even possible? Said Mitchell. Okay, enough of the Ford Chevy crap. Make the calls. Dan reluctantly punched up the numbers and made the contacts. Steve finished another drink. In 48 hours, there would be 4 to run Highway 187. Chapter 2. Robert Caldwell goosed the throttle linkage, his left hand on the carburetor and his right making adjustments to the idle with a screwdriver. The engine rumbled and burbled, then settled down to an unsettling cadence. Perfect, said Caldwell, screwing on the air cleaner and slamming the hood. Who's your daddy? The Challenger seemed to want to speak to the question, but when Caldwell reached in and silenced the engine with a twist of the ignition key, any answer given by the Challenger would have to wait. Caldwell sat behind the wheel and stared out his garage to the streets, his hands clenched around the 3-spoke rim. He paused to remember the turn from his driveway that would lead him to the beginnings of the deadly road. US 187 started only a half hour from where he lived. All he needed to do was roll down that driveway, turn left and head straight due west, save for a couple of lefts and rights. Caldwell was well informed about US 187 his whole life. He'd heard the stories about the disappearances, the tragedies told by others. None of it seemed to matter then. To Caldwell, the stories were a fine line between innocent fabrication and a large load of malicious, steaming crap. That is until he lost his best friend to the highway. That made the difference between fiction and reality. That made it personal. Caldwell thirsted for revenge afterward. It seethed in his blood like a maggot infestation, chewing away at him for years. But when time blunted the anger and quenched the vengeful desire, Caldwell went on to other things. Marriage and a home supplanted the wrath and the hostility. That all changed when Dan Mitchell called. The thirst for retribution that Caldwell had suppressed for so many years came back with a fierce immediacy, parching his tongue and lips. He wanted to take on the road, to face the entity and make a stand. Dan Mitchell's call was all that Caldwell needed to rekindle the ferocity within. That road was nothing but a virulent asphalt serpent that needed to be eradicated at all costs. Or if it couldn't be eradicated, then at least it was to be mocked and challenged. Caldwell wanted answers to make sense of it all, determine who or whatever was responsible for Matt Wesley's untimely disappearance off the face of this planet. It was high school then, and Wesley often prattled about removing himself to California to start his own speed shop and bathe in that fine Cali sun. When Wesley disappeared, people talked. Many concluded that Wesley had left town, thinking he actualized his dream, that he made it to the fine California sunshine to sling parts at his own speed shop. A few more thought otherwise. After a long period of absence, even Wesley's parents figured the reports were true, that their only son had run away to the Golden State. That was the best that they could hope for. Bobby Caldwell knew better. Matt never made it to California. It had been that highway. It ate him, and nobody ever saw Wesley again. "Bastard highway," said Caldwell. "This'll be for you, old buddy." Caldwell exited the Challenger and pulled an orange microfiber towel from his back pocket. He caressed the towel over the black paint, removing fingerprint marks. In minutes, the shine of wax pounced like a panther at Caldwell, making his pride swell. "Daddy, are you going out somewhere?" asked a diminutive voice from behind. A little girl stood at his heels, her teddy bear hanging by a limp arm from her hand. "Oh, don't worry, dear. Daddy's going for a little cruise tomorrow afternoon, and I'll be back by dinner time." Caldwell led his daughter by the hand from the garage and pressed the remote. "It's going to be easy," he said, watching the garage door close in paneled segments, consuming the Challenger. As easy as ice cream on a breezy summer day. Chapter 3. Steve rolled out his '69 Bosch 302 Mustang by hand, pushing her into the light and away from a long hibernation. He resisted the temptation to fire the engine until he did a once-over, pouring some lubricating oil down the spark plug holes and priming the fuel and oil pumps. Passing cars slowed on occasion to get a glimpse of the old Detroit relic as it emerged toward the brightness of day. Steve hit the brake and stopped the Mustang in its tracks. He exited and patted the roof, shining the chrome drip rail with his shirt sleeve, and laid a hand on the blue oval paint. This is going to be a real challenge, he figured, imagining himself up against some of the best street racers that ever tore up the town of Rock Springs, Wyoming. It was going to be a downright nasty race, and he knew it. The added curves and built-in dangers of Route 187 was going to make it even tougher. A tingle of fear ran deep in the pit of his stomach. What if Mitchell was right? What if someone didn't get out alive? What if all the rumors were true, that Route 187 was a demonic road hell-bent on the consumption of human souls? It's all BS, he said, scoffing at such a ludicrous idea that a road could be possessed. He opened the hood to reveal the 302 cubic inch power plant. The engine chrome glistened like jewelry, sunbeams kissing the polished speed parts. "You're in love with that car, aren't you?" said an intruding voice, more a pronouncement of fact than inquiry. She approached Steve from behind to grab him by the waist. "I thought I'd take her out of storage and go for a drive. She's been off the road all season, and as you know, Carol, leaving a car sit can ruin it. These cars are made to run." "Where do you plan to go with it?" she asked. Carol Cole ran her hand seductively along the paint and added, "Wherever it is, can I join?" Carol's imagination ran unrestrained at the prospect of a road trip. Though she would never admit it, she loved the old Mustang and delighted in going for weekend jaunts in good weather. "Where I'm going is off limits. You wouldn't enjoy it." "Try me," she insisted. Steve removed wires and spark plugs, pouring a shot of lubricating oil down each bore. "I can't really say. Let's call it a guy's night out, a friendly wager among friends." "What, are you going to race somebody?" she asked. Instant recall took Carol to the hot, lazy days of years gone by. In her youth, she'd ridden with Steve many a time, the unwilling passenger in a drag race. Riding the death seat in such situations introduced Carol to the most terrifying experiences of her life. Yet Steve hauled her through it all without a scratch. That was years ago, a lifetime away from where they stood today, a bygone period in their lives, another dimension of time and space. Steve was fast, she remembered, no doubt about it, and he cleaned up pretty good from those Friday night bets at the local burger joint. His winnings helped put the down payment on their house. Was her husband somehow coming out of retirement? "You're a little old for a mid-life crisis, aren't you?" Carol taunted him, hoping the barb might extract a confession. "You're prying, Carol." Steve tinkered under the hood, giving the rare and exotic cross-boss carburetors a shot of quick start. "That's because I'm your wife, Steve. You're going nowhere unless you tell me what you plan to do with this thing." She immediately resented the car now, this street machine sitting like a big anvil of interference to an open dialogue between husband and wife. Steve saw a look of disdain on Carol's face, a look he'd seen innumerable times. If he didn't distract her soon, he'd have to capitulate to her interrogation or be relegated to sleep on the couch. "What's for dinner?" he asked. "Who's on the starting grid?" she countered. Steve shrugged and considered his next words. "If you really need to know, we're running the old road tomorrow afternoon." "What?" "Come again? I didn't quite hear that," said Carol. "We're running the old road." "What old road?" she asked. Carol's heart rate escalated. "Me and a couple of friends are running 187, he said, wincing as the words left his mouth. He already sensed her wrath gain momentum like a tornado about to touch down. "And you plan to run the Mustang on that highway? Are you out of your mind? You'll die!" Steve got in and fired the engine, letting it crank over without the spark plugs, allowing the lubricating oil to coat the cylinder walls. The cold crank primed the oil galleries, camshaft and crankshaft. "Nonsense," said Steve. "I know what you're thinking, Carol, but I don't buy into all the bull about the highway. It isn't haunted. It isn't cursed. It's an ordinary road, and besides, how dangerous can it be when we'll all be the only ones on it? The road is closed, for God's sake." Carol poised her hands on her waist. "It's closed for good reason," she said, "and God's sake, to use your words, had nothing to do with the closure. It's not an ordinary road, Steve. It's an extraordinary road. Extraordinarily dangerous. I want no part of it. No part of it at all. I'm not asking you to be a part of it. No matter, I've already committed. Warning bells rang in Carol Cole's apprehensive mind. A conflicted bag of emotions rose from the dormant state of her subconscious. The fear of danger, the elation of a victory, the instinct for survival, and the love she felt for her husband swirled from her depths like a dark funnel cloud within. I can't afford to lose you, Steve. She put her hand to his shoulder, her eyes tearing up. It seemed not that long ago she lost a distant cousin to Route 187. Everyone from the town of Rock Springs knew someone who'd been swallowed by the road. The coroner pronounced her cousin dead on arrival. It took the insistence of relatives that an accident reconstructionist be retained to analyze her cousin's crash. The collision took place at high speed, judging by the devastation inflicted upon the bodywork and chassis. An expert wasn't really needed to explain the physics of high speed and colliding matter. The only thing missing from the equation was the hit-and-run vehicle, and nobody had an idea where that went. It left no trace of body parts or fluids at the scene, as if it had never existed. A maintenance crew found her cousin's body during daytime hours. Work schedules demanded these crews service the roads and highways at all hours, but those that dared tread on 187 did so at their own risk and only in the daylight. In the road's heyday, people learned to stay off of Route 187 at night. It became a well-established fact that the road presented the most danger from twilight on into early morning. When twilight cast its shadowy hand upon 187, highway crews were already long gone, leaving behind their government obligations just before the horrid nighttime carnage began. In the morning, when the crews would report once again for work, daylight would shine a light on the cavalcade of wreckage. Dismembered corpses, severed heads, and broken bodies baked in the afternoon sun as they decayed at the side of the two-lane road. Sometimes the remains were never found, only empty and undamaged vehicles left on the shoulder. There was a certain wild logic to the road, and its danger ebbed and flowed to the time of day. Like basic fundamental laws of the cosmos, even 187 had its own set of irrevocable rules to be followed, though twisted and outlandish as they might be. Every worker heeded those rules, and even the superiors refrained from ordering any crew to service the road beyond first hint of twilight. The same held true for the nearby inhabitants, all of whom feared the road with few exceptions. Steve and his 3 competitors planned to run the stretch at twilight, as if to scoff at the superstitious hype. Carol knew all about Route 187 and its hideous quirks. If she couldn't stop the race, she'd try to influence other factors. Her next question was obvious. So what time do you plan to run this so-called race? Twilight, Steve answered, cranking the engine once more, circulating the lifeblood throughout the motor, feeding the most remote passageways. Steve, she shouted. That's it. I'm pulling the plug on this foolishness. You're not going, and that's final. Carol gathered up the spark plugs that Steve had laid out in neat rows on either side of the engine bay. I'm pulling the plugs, she yelled. You hear me? I'm pulling the plugs. Steve exited and took her by the arm. Listen, he said, removing the bulging spark plugs from between her fingers. You're neglecting one thing, Carol. And what's that? She asked. $25,000 to the one that comes out the other side in first place. Now that was money they could use. Maybe this dark event would become a golden opportunity. Steve registered the subtleties in her face and knew exactly what she thought. And we can use the money for the kitchen remodeling, he added. 25,000, you said? Her mental calculator making computations. 25 grand, he repeated, holding her by the shoulders. Well, maybe it's not so dangerous after all. I mean, the road's been closed for years. Maybe you're right, Steve. Now you're talking, he said. He plucked the remaining spark plugs from her hands and started to screw them into the engine block and connect the plug wires. When he finished, he got into the Mustang and fired the old brute. The modified small block engine kicked out 450 horses, shimmy shaking on its motor mounts, bucking to escape from the stable. The raw sound of roaring pistons and exhaust sent a chill through Carol, and her thoughts turned once again to the road. She read her husband's face and saw the obsessive delight in his eyes as he mashed the throttle and listened to the engine. There was no turning back now. He'd made the bet. He made the commitment, and she well knew that when her husband committed, there would be no turning back. He'd make it, she figured. He had to make it to the other side. Chapter 4. Dan Mitchell closed the hood on his '69 Camaro with smug satisfaction, convinced that his engine modifications had reached maximum optimization. The suspension was tight, the steering crisp, and the engine ate gobs of gasoline, spitting out horsepower in a fair exchange. Mitchell sat on his porch step and sipped a beer, watching the slow pace of the occasional passing car. He feared the road. The legends about the highway persisted in his psyche, plaguing him since childhood. The stories of road demons and goblins never quite banished themselves, refusing to die from his memory, as most demons die when coming of age. They remain with him, alive and well in his imagination, waiting to pounce. Mitchell wanted them gone, and gone for good. Running 187 would be his chance to debunk the stories and the legends. Ride the road to the other side and come out first with 25 grand in his pocket. This was his win-win situation. No more demons, and all the richer because of it. He took a final slug from his bottle and gazed at the Camaro. This would be his chariot out of here to a new life. Chapter 5. Tommy Hicks finished pouring the last drops of octane boost into the gas tank and twisted the gas cap. "You are my sweet Hemi," he said, adoring his Plymouth Superbird as if it were the last woman on earth. Hicks had plenty of women in his time, and even a few making out in the back seat of the Plymouth, but none stayed around as long or as lovingly as the Superbird. Women came and women went. He took a brief excursion into the dim recesses of his amorous past, but then his thoughts turned toward the road. Hicks had heard all the stories and the wild claims just like everyone else in Rock Springs. Hicks was a mechanic, and a damn good one at that. His mind worked on combustion and the dynamics of suspension geometry, with little room in the synapses for anything else. Stories about Route 187 simply didn't register in his mind. They were tales told by children, rumors and lies perpetuated by these little monsters into their adult life. Sure, he'd read about the deaths on 187 in the town paper, and during the days of operation, US 187 racked up a lot of body bags. But how was that any different from any other highway in the USA? People drove cars, and some of them died. It could happen to anyone at any time. That was a fact of life. Hicks ran his hand along the ostentatious rear wing of his pride, his absolute joy. The wing looked like a giant coat hanger, but it actually worked, providing the needed downforce at high speed. The prize money, $25,000 in all, plus the thrill of victory, now that would sit well on the mantelpiece of his soul, a victory he could toast on the dreary descent into old age. This would be a cinch, as none of the other participants possessed the enormous Hemi power plant under the hood. Size mattered in horsepower wars, it always did. The 426 Hemi engine would swallow both Ford and GM, even Dodge, and at the end of the line, instead of the big three, there would only be the big one, Tommy Hicks. Chapter 6. The sun set in its customary path across the sky, and nightfall dimmed the town of Rock Springs. A negative energy invaded the sleepy community like a creeping, misty skeleton hand, gripping the slumbering residents, all of them, and unsettling the night. Something big was going down, and people could sense it through the blurry prism of their nightmares. US 187 pulsed with energy as if awakening from a cryogenic sleep. The only ones who didn't dream were the four men. Each slept undisturbed, almost crypt-like in their respective beds, human altarpieces for a grand sacrifice to the god of perpetual motion. Sunday morning rolled in, and the sun rose over the horizon, performing early duty on a restful day. It was like any other ordinary day in Rock Springs. Shopkeepers opened their doors for business, and people ate breakfast and went to their respective places of worship. For the four men, Sunday was race day, a pagan tribute to the combustion engine, and on this Sunday, they would finally prove in their own minds that the rumors about the highway were bunk. No matter who won, they'd all go out for a beer after the race and toast to themselves for their bravery amidst a town full of cowards. Steve arose well-rested and his five senses on high alert. Carol stayed in bed and rolled over, determined to maintain her deep sleep session. Steve peered out the bedroom window and soaked up the morning sun. He stepped outside the sliding door and tasted the chill of the departed night. The cold concrete of the platform stoop tingled his bare feet. "It's going to be glorious," he said. Minutes later, Carol made another turn in bed to touch her husband, and instead of Steve's refined muscular features, she contacted an empty pillow. His absence stirred her to consciousness, and she awakened to see the outline of her husband through the open screen window of their bedroom. "Steve?" Her call to him went unanswered. She studied the silhouette of her husband, admiring the form of the man that she married. Then the outline vaporized into nothingness. What the hell? Now fully alert and oriented, her eyes scanned to trace the whereabouts of this apparition. Her thoughts struggled to digest what just happened. Early morning hallucination, or a holdover from some demented dream, her mind tried to decide. Steve walked into the room, a towel wrapped around him and nothing else, his hair hanging in matted clumps. That shower felt good, he said, letting the towel fall to his feet. Relief swept over Carol, and she dismissed the bizarre special effect of a minute before. Carol bored into her husband's eyes and knew she was in for it. The sight of Steve's marbleized muscles cranked the lust engine, and she fell back to the pillow. Steve leapt onto the bed. Care to give a condemned man his last wish? Carol giggled and submitted to their well-rehearsed mating game. Chapter 7. They say as a man ages, dreams become less frequent. By logical deduction, that must also be true of nightmares. Caldwell didn't dream at all last night as best he could recollect. Yet his awakening scream defied the assertion that the frequency of dreams and nightmares faded with age. His wife awoke with a scare at the wild vibrato that was her husband's voice. "What's all the noise?" she asked, rubbing her eyes and stretching out in her clinging nightgown. "Must have been a bad dream," said Caldwell. "Go back to sleep." It was nothing. Caldwell heard a knock. "Daddy? Are you all right, Daddy?" Little Susie pushed open the bedroom door. "Everything's fine, sweetie," said Sylvia. "Go back to bed and sleep a little longer, honey." "Daddy's okay?" she asked. "Daddy's fine," said Caldwell. "Okay," said Susie, and dutifully marched back to her bedroom. Bobby Caldwell grabbed his chest. "I feel scared, Sylvia." "Then don't do it." "Don't do it, Robert. Call your friends and tell them you changed your mind." "But I have to go through with it now. I'm committed." "You don't have to do anything, Robert. If you want, I'll make the calls and cancel for you." Caldwell gave careful consideration to the idea of backing out as he sat up in bed. What would happen if he did? He'd never be able to face the guys again. He'd never find the answers he sought. He'd never know the ultimate fate of his best friend. He'd never have closure, and the road, US 187, would still be there, an attractive nuisance to bother him for the balance of his life. "No, Sylvia, I have to go. I need to find answers. I need to close off that part of my life, and when I win, we'll take the money for a down payment on a new house and move away from this dead town." Sylvia did not want to see her husband race, but she did like the idea of $25,000 lining her bank account. She was well informed about the road, like everyone from the town, and she believed that if her husband ran the road, he might surely die. Her worry lines betrayed her. "Sylvia, it's going to work out fine for me. I have a fast car. Whatever lies out there, whatever took Wesley won't be a match for me. I'll outrun them, or it. Wait for me on the other side, and I'll bring home the prize. We'll move away from here and never look back." How could she argue? She knew by her husband's voice that his determination squelched any argument she could ever make to the contrary. She lay back in bed and drew the covers over the pink silk of her nightgown. Caldwell seized her by the waist, drawing her close. Chapter 8. Tommy Hicks inhaled his breakfast with quick bites and gulps, bright-eyed and full of aggression. His sleep invigorated him, and he diverted his thoughts toward an automotive beatdown today. He ate his cereal while seated on the stool in front of the Superbird, watching her like a silent movie. This was going to be one hell of a blast on the Forbidden Highway. High-octane gasoline pumped through his spirits, an octane as high as the racing gas running through the Plymouth. A cartoon roadrunner emblazoned on the rear wing smiled at him with a sardonic grin. Hicks gave the bird to the roadrunner, extending his middle finger with the expectation that somehow this would register. "We're going to be trouble for the Ford and Chevy camps, aren't we, little bird? As for the Dodge camp, well, I'm not even concerned about Caldwell. He can't drive." The roadrunner maintained its static smirk, unchanged as before. Or was it? Hicks looked closer at the painted bird. Now it had teeth and sharp eyes that bored through Hicks with murderous intent. Hicks took a double take. The roadrunner was again back to its former self, its beak smirking, holding a racing helmet under its wing. Hicks dismissed the illusion and stood up, kicking the stool away. It rolled toward the back of the garage on its tiny casters. Hicks took his empty cereal bowl and went inside the house to prepare. Chapter 9. Dan Mitchell offered up a prayer that all would go well today. Racing was a dangerous sport, and he knew it. He also knew that the perils associated with racing were not about to change because four fools planned to run an empty road. An old grudge run among friends, Mitchell could have lived with the bet had it been any other road but 187. Mitchell and his Camaro had run with the best and the fastest. It had been years since he'd raced, and those days had ended quietly long ago. But racing bugs never really died. They went into hibernation instead, waiting for a signaling event to bring them up from the cavernous regions of a man's soul. For Mitchell, the bug had awakened like a dormant cicada, making a comeback as though it had never been dormant at all. If Mitchell had figured his racing days were over, he figured wrong. By dusk, he'd again find himself in the company of the best racers around, but it wasn't the prize money that mattered this time. Winning was not the primary goal anymore. Surviving was. Cole hadn't a frigging clue what he'd stirred up all over a stupid bet in a bar, and today Mitchell was actually going to do it. Mitchell had repeatedly promised himself he'd never do the road, that he had no interest in what Route 187 could show him, but somehow Cole had conned Mitchell into an unexpected reversal. Now Mitchell sat by the front fender of his Chevrolet and stewed over the mess he'd dragged himself into. He wasn't so old that he'd grown tired of living, nor so reckless as to risk bodily injury to himself. He wanted to remain a part of the human race, if only for a while longer. He would only survive by exercising the greatest of due care. Chapter 10. Sunday unfurled in brilliant splendor, and the afternoon sun began to set in a burning ball of orange on the horizon. Each man watched the setting sun with the high tension of power lines, their bodies bristling with electricity. Time to saddle up as four men brought out their street machines to play. Sunday's lazy residents and their uninspired routines were jarred by the sound of engines coughing to life in four different areas of town. The rumble of V8s spread across Rock Springs end to end, connecting like a chain of amino acids, stirring to life with the burning of gasoline and the creation of energy. People were roused from their dinners, and somehow they knew what was happening. Word traveled faster than light speed in small-town USA, and the residents knew. They all knew. Four of Detroit's finest pieces of iron converged together: Plymouth, Dodge, Ford, and Chevrolet, coming to meet at the start of US 187, as if for some bizarre bull session. If only it had been for that reason and no other. Cole sat on the fender of his Boss 302 Mustang, relaxed and arms folded. The aggressive rumble of the Superbird grew louder, followed by the brutish bellow of a 440 Challenger. The remarkable tone of Mitchell's cross-ram intake on the Z28 completed the symphony of cubic inches. "What took you jerks so long?" shouted Cole. Each shut down their street machine in a domino effect until all were silent. The air went still, and remnants of the sun retreated behind a cluster of trees at the side of the highway, leaving behind the dangerous nighttime festivities for the competitors of this tortured road. "Are we late?" asked Hicks, his Superbird parked nose to nose with Cole, his arm resting casually on the door of the Winged Warrior. "Just in time," said Cole, right back at him. "I'm ready," said Caldwell, emerging from his Challenger and going to the trunk of his car. He slipped the key in and flipped open the lid, withdrawing a wicked-looking DP-12 double-barrel shotgun with a 16-round capacity. "Hey, Caldwell, what the hell do you plan to do with that thing?" asked Mitchell, now leaning against the fender of his Camaro. "He plans to blow out our tires. It's the only way he can win," said Hicks. The men roared with laughter. Caldwell took a bead on the wooden sign posted in the middle of Route 187 and pulled the trigger. Blam, blam, went the shotgun, tearing up wood and sending splinters everywhere. Blam, blam, again blasted the DP-12, destroying more of the sign, disintegrating the words "road closed" and "do not." Only fragments of the word "enter" remained, daring them like an evil invitation to drive the highway. Caldwell went over and kicked away the weakened wooden supports, sending the entire sign collapsing to the ground. "Damn road," said Caldwell. The surrounding silence beckoned a response, and then Cole sounded off. "Frigging highway," said Cole. "Ditto," said Hicks. "Well, looks like we're on a highway to hell," said Mitchell. "Hope we don't all end up there." "Don't be such a chicken," said Cole. "It's show time. Now the rules are pretty simple. First one on the other side will sit on the hood of the winning car and wait for the others to finish. If someone doesn't come out, for whatever reason, the rest of us go back in and get him. Everything else is fair game. Understood?" They all nodded, each man now more fearful of the possibility that in fact one or more of them might not make it. Dan Mitchell shuddered inside and wanted to turn around and run. A fight-or-flight response demanded that he flee this insane contest, but his competitive streak made him stand his ground. He was doing it. No turning back. Besides, he had his Chevrolet Camaro armed with a behemoth cross-ram intake to keep him out of trouble. Mitchell became confident he'd outrun any problems in whatever form they might take. Caldwell sought solace in his shotgun, placing it on the front seat of his Challenger. If horsepower couldn't defeat the road, a blast from the heavy gauge might tame whatever surprises came his way. He placed his divine trust in the gauge, and when the time arrived to draw it, he was ready to launch buckshot, lots of it. Steve Cole removed his mind from the danger by thinking about the prize money he earmarked for engine and suspension upgrades, and if there was any money left over, he'd remodel that kitchen for Carol. Cole looked down the highway, seeing the dotted line get smaller until it merged with the horizon. His thoughts shifted away from the prize money and focused on shifting gears and spinning red lines. Tommy Hicks gave no thought about how he would cope with the highway because he didn't want to believe. His mind was filled with thoughts of octane boost, horsepower, spark plugs, and detonation. He'd win this race and enjoy that fat prize at the end of the road. Perhaps he'd buy himself a trip out of Rock Springs to a place that never heard of Route 187 or the boring inhabitants that lived off the intrigue and the myths. "Let's line up the cars," said Cole. "And how do you plan to line them up?" asked Hicks. "It's a 2-lane road and we have 4 cars. "Already thought about that," said Cole. "2 of us will have to line up on both shoulders, and we'll draw lots to see who gets the blacktop lanes and who rides the outer lanes, so to speak." Cole produced 4 straws from his pocket and showed the men. "The shoulders are not outer lanes," said Caldwell. "There's no traction there for a good start. It's all dirt and gravel. This is total BS. "What's our alternative, then?" asked Cole. "Let's just go home," said Mitchell, seeking an opportunity to put an end to this mad project. Caldwell, Cole, and Hicks trained their attention on Mitchell like pack dogs preparing to turn on the weakest member of the group. "You're joking," said Hicks. "Are you saying you want to back out, Mitchell? Your little Camaro can't run with the big boys?" Mitchell realized his mistake too late. Showing weakness at this late stage was not a wise move. Now he absolutely had to win the race or he'd never hear the end of it from the guys. They'd chide him about his Camaro being too slow, or they'd scold him for being a weakling. Either way, unless he won this race, he'd be branded. "You're all going to eat my asphalt when I shove my car in gear," said Mitchell. "And to show you what my car can do, I'll actually volunteer to take the shoulder while you lesser men can draw your lots." Mitchell smirked at his quick-witted recovery, now watching the men for their reaction. "I'll take the shoulder too," said Cole. "No, I will," said Hicks. "Forget it, boys, the shoulder's mine," said Caldwell. Hicks and Coles looked at each other and shrugged. "It's all yours," said Steve, and he patted Caldwell on the back. "Who's going to sound the start of the race?" Hicks asked. "I will," said Caldwell, reaching in to show his shotgun once again. "When you hear this 12-gauge, nail it." "Let's move," said Cole, and each of the men returned to their machines. The sun's rays disappeared and a gray curtain cast its veil over the highway. The faded white line ran straight for several miles, cutting a swath through a forest of dead trees that dotted the horizon. Cole and Hicks aligned their cars evenly on the 2-lane blacktop while Mitchell positioned his Camaro to the driver's side of Cole, and the Challenger of Caldwell nestled next to the Superbird, occupying the right lane. 4 engines idled in an angry rumble of primitive Detroit technology. Caldwell waved his shotgun out the window, and in doing so caused the men to rev their engines furiously. Tachometers spun in their dials, rising and falling, and rising again. Car bodies shimmied. Pre-race adrenaline seethed through the veins of the 4 highwaymen, and engines vigorously pumped their octane. Caldwell blasted his shotgun toward the heavens, and tires ripped asphalt. Rear ends wigwagged for traction, launching 4 bullets down the highway, tires screeching in agony, clawing for grip. "Yee-haw!" shouted Hicks from his Superbird, immediately assuming the lead. Cole dogged the Superbird, chasing the flying wing with a powerful gallop. Behind Cole, both Mitchell and Caldwell merged smoothly to the asphalt, heading down the road nose to tail, pulling hard in the chase to catch the Mustang. Cole ran on the heels of Hicks, feeling the rearview mirror of the Plymouth. The collective speed of 4 muscle cars barreled down the abandoned highway, their engines singing a celebration of vintage horsepower. "This ain't so bad," said Mitchell. the dials on his Camaro all pointing upward and in the desired zones of temperature, oil pressure, and RPMs. Not so bad at all. Mitchell closed ranks with Cole's Mustang, creating a tight holding pattern. The Challenger drove door to door with the high-winding Camaro, unable to pull away from Mitchell. The 302 cubic inch Chevrolet hummed a reliable, steady tune in counterpoint to the Challenger. Mitchell could see the tall wing of the Superbird ahead of the Mustang and knew that Hicks presented a problem. A high-winding 302 engine had little chance against a 426 Hemi, or a 440 for that matter, but maybe Mitchell would win this race on reliability. He listened intently to the pitch of the Hemi and the 440 engines. The old Superbird might die short of the finish line. The Challenger might throw a rod. The Camaro Z28 killed the Boss 302 in 1969, both on the track and the street. Steve Cole's Boss would surely lose to the Camaro. Then Mitchell would beat the label of cowardly chicken, call him what they will. Hicks peered down the road, the white line his pathfinder to victory. The highway stretched to infinity with no finality in sight, simply no end. The bullet nose of the Superbird cut through the air like a sharpened edge of a butcher's cleaver, but something weird was happening. Hicks sensed a disconnection from the reality of his surroundings. The terrain morphed into something peculiar, yet his Superbird charged forth, impervious of the changes. The forest of dead trees that flanked 187 quickly receded and changed to a landscape littered with crystalline stalagmites rising from the sandy soil. By the thousands, they looked like giant fallen icicles jutting up on either side of the road. "Damn it!" exclaimed Hicks. The back end of his Superbird skated side to side, about to teeter out of control. Hicks steered right, then left to correct. His heart thumped in terror at the threat of a fatal spin. "Come on, baby," he shrieked. "Come on!" He let off the throttle and corrected the skid, regaining the upper hand. He checked his mirrors to see what had happened to the others. They drove in the distance far off from his tail, having reduced their speed significantly. None were eager to pass, and their velocities fell away from the triple digits to a more pedestrian 60 miles per hour. "Black ice!" screamed Caldwell to Mitchell through his window. Mitchell nodded and kept pace door to door with the Challenger. A thick sheet of ice coated the entire landscape now, as if they had passed through a time portal to a frozen epoch. The ambient temperature dropped precipitously from 70 degrees to below freezing in seconds, and it baffled the men. Cole's skeptical mind spun in amazement at the incredible climactic change. He drew conclusions. This might have explained some of the accidents and fatalities, but it didn't explain them all. The giant stalagmites of ice soon melted away, and the temperature bounced back to a comfortable and breezy 70 degrees. The men were perplexed at the phenomenon, making them temporarily forget the prize money at stake. It wasn't long before Hicks snapped them out of their studied analysis. Hicks mashed the throttle and adjusted his Superbird to the upper digits. The Hemi engine snarled in answer to the heavy foot of Hicks. The cylinder walls of the 426 bathed in exploding gasoline. Hicks put some distance between him and his adversaries, watching them grow smaller yet again. He's going to be impossible to catch, thought Cole, the Boss Mustang raging against the wild abilities demonstrated by the Superbird's hemispherical combustion engine. In a flash, Hicks gained a half-mile advantage. Then the Superbird's taillights disappeared around a bend in the road. Mitchell and Caldwell, still side by side, rode on Cole's bumper. They saw the Plymouth's vanishing trick. Hicks was going to win the race. Hicks gunned the throttle, and the Plymouth's engine raged with horsepower. Then the engine fell silent. The speedometer needle went off the scale, and Hicks perceived a floating sensation. His eyes appreciated the vectors of movement, but his ears heard no blast of the engine. Had it quit? "What on earth?" he questioned, his voice barely a whimper. The engine, the hum of the tires, the usual rattles and squeaks of a vintage car, all were silent now. Somehow Hicks had piloted himself into a vacuum of time and space. His head felt funny. His mind was dazed. The landscape before him appeared hazy in the twilight. Something was terribly wrong. His mind drifted and his focus left him. The Superbird continued on, racing at a speed in excess of the numbers on the speedometer. How fast was he really going? How much longer would it be before the finish line? A checkered flag fluttered through his mind, and Hicks fought to maintain control of his five senses. Then, in the distance, a child darted out into the road and stood there, holding a teddy bear. Hicks blinked in disbelief. Was that Bobby's kid? A blink was all it took, because he flicked his wrists with amazing dexterity and speed, twisting the steering wheel hard left to avoid the child, sending the Superbird into a barrel roll. The child turned and laughed at Hicks with precocious innocence. Hicks shrieked in the vacuous silence, and sheet metal folded around him, crushing his body like the death squeeze of a trash compactor. The Superbird continued its death roll right off the highway, coming to rest in a gully out of sight of the road. Radiator steam rose up from the splintered front end. Hicks moaned in the silence, his difficult breaths more labored in the mysterious ether he had entered. His chest collapsed, spurts of blood ejected from the corners of his mouth whenever he coughed. The safety belt still held his broken body in place. He couldn't feel his legs. And where were his arms? He saw his hands in plain view, but they lacked any sensation. Hicks tilted his head to fix on his predicament, and his eyes captured the top of the gully. The child stood at the crest, a translucent phantom-like outline against the darkened skies. It was not Bobby's child. It descended to meet Hicks in a mock effort to help. The look of distress and concern on the apparition's face morphed into a wicked grin. It seemed to speak, yet said nothing. "Children are the future," echoed its words in Hicks' mind. The apparition moved closer. "Too bad you never had any, Tommy." Hicks squeezed his eyes closed. "All those women you had, and what do you have to show for it?" The apparition was almost upon him. "You loved this car," spoke the phantom, injecting its words into Tommy's brain. "It meant more to you than anyone around you, and now you have no one. Now you have nothing. Not even this car." The words reverberated in his mind, while the impish phantom laughed maniacally at Hicks. Tom Hicks groaned in rattling breaths, and his chest wheezed in asthmatic gasps. Hicks considered the haunting words transmitted by the little demon and agreed. What did he have to show for his life? No family, no love, only emptiness wrapped up in an old muscle car. The phantom child giggled at him before it disintegrated into pieces. The dismembered fragments shape-shifted themselves into tiny skeletons, dozens of them, and they advanced on Hicks. They crawled like miniature soldiers, creeping their way to the dashboard of the wreck. Hicks screamed like a lunatic, but no sound came from his mouth. He struggled to unclasp his seatbelt. Too late. They leapt at his eyes with chattering teeth, eating through his sockets and into his brain, sending Hicks into shock at the excruciating pain. This was Tommy Hicks' last race, his final DNF, his did not finish. Cole, Mitchell, and Caldwell rounded the bend and passed the Superbird, their friend's final resting place. High grass obscured the Plymouth, and fresh rust enveloped the body like accelerated entropy, flaking metal and chipping paint, marring the once pristine car beyond recognition. The body of Hicks sat ramrod in the driver's seat, still gripping the wheel, nothing but bones and tattered flesh. "Where the hell is he?" said Cole, noticing for the first time that his engine too had fallen silent. The vacuum absorbed his words, sending them to nothingness. He kept the gas pedal jammed to the floor, and so did Caldwell and Mitchell. In a blip of time, they were safely out of the zone that had taken Hicks. The sounds of roaring power plants resumed their raucous noise, and the instrument gauges came back to life, pointing to vital signs within the engines. The collective tune of American muscle was not nearly as melodic without the bass line of the Hemi engine, their horsepower quartet now reduced to a trio. "He's going to do it," thought Cole. "Hicks has this race wrapped up." Caldwell and Mitchell also felt the sting of defeat as their eyes scanned the horizon for any sign of the winged Plymouth out front. They saw nothing but darkening twilight and an empty road. Cole blocked his nearest competitors, straddling the center line to shut down any further attempts to put him in the rear view. Like a game of chess, Cole calculated possible outcomes in his mind. Maybe Hicks would run out of gas from the thirsty Hemi engine. Or maybe the Hemi would blow up. Perhaps he'd simply lose his way somehow. Or maybe Hicks would crash before the finish line. Each hypothetical dangled itself before Cole like a piece of tasty bait, and each had a certain level of appeal he was too afraid to admit. Assuming he was right about one or more of these scenarios, Cole had to ask himself the most critical question: would he go back to save a friend? He grappled with his conscience, then came to the most fitting conclusion. Maybe he would, and maybe he wouldn't. Why should he now decide on something that might never happen? Winning was all that counted in the moment. He'd worry about the morality of such issues after the race, not before. 25,000 rode the fine dotted line, and that 25,000 would go a long way to acquiring more speed parts for the Mustang. A kitchen remodeling could wait, and so could his wife. All these thoughts came rushing to the forefront at a moment when Caldwell made a competitive pass on the shoulder. Dust clouds flew up, and in a split second Cole saw the red taillights of the old Dodge Challenger. Caldwell cheered at the move. "Pass me in the weeds, will you?" said Cole, pouring on the steam, trying to keep up with the Dodge big block. The Challenger put down a large chunk of real estate and left behind the Boss 302 and Z28, giving both men the slip. Cole maintained his driving line, taking up the whole road to prevent another pass. He waved a cautionary finger out the window at Mitchell to warn him not to get any idea of passing like Caldwell. Mitchell gave Steve the middle finger in return and nailed the throttle, closing ranks with the Boss 302's bumper. Mitchell had room to pass, but not enough horsepower to get by. The Challenger led the way, gaining distance, while Camaro and Mustang ran nose to tail, neither able to pull away from the other. The odometers rolled like slot machines, clicking off numbers at a blistering rate. The men pushed deeper into uncharted land. Then the character of the road changed again. No longer the straight arrow of asphalt, a series of tremendous curves came at them, curves that assumed drastic shapes that took the men on a wild road race. The twisting sensation churned their innards on the serpentine road. Mitchell had an ill feeling in his gut. The Superbird's fast getaway seemed surreal. Could Hicks really have gotten so far ahead? Mitchell wanted to quit and turn around while it was still safe. But how dangerous had it really been? A slip on some road ice was it. If the cursed road had nothing more to dish out, nothing more than a few patches of black ice, then he'd be safe. Mitchell thought about the fat prize that waited at the finish line. No, he would not stop. He could not stop. Just listen to that cross-ram manifold. Hicks might not make it. He might crash or suffer a mechanical failure. Anything could happen between the start and finish lines. Mitchell had raced his Camaro in enough grudge runs from the past to know that perceived outcomes were never assured, just like life. Sure, death was the final finish line for anyone's life, but a lot happened between the green flag and the checkered flag. And like life, auto racing had many variables and many uncertainties, much dependent on driver skill, courage, and determination. Throw in the mechanical prowess of the car, and these added variables pushed the victory equation into a parallel universe of uncertainty. Mitchell's Camaro powered on, glued to Cole's bumper, Ford and Chevrolet in the hunt for Plymouth and Dodge, hell-bent on the prize money and pride of victory. Caldwell spied the Camaro and Mustang from the comfort of his rear-view mirror, right where they belonged. His only concern now, to run Hicks down, and victory would be assured. Caldwell wondered about the road. If bad ice was the worst that 187 could offer, then maybe his old friend Matt Wesley actually survived and made it to California to open that speed shop. Some friend he turned out to be, to disappear and never call or send a postcard. What a traitor, grunted Caldwell. And Wesley had promised to be a friend for life. The thought made Caldwell bitter. He didn't want to believe it, but the facts spoke for themselves. People were self-interested and deceitful at every opportunity, and that included Wesley. To hell with him, said Caldwell. In the distance, Robert Caldwell saw a sharp curve in the highway. His speed was 130 miles per hour, and he firmly braked to bring down the Challenger's velocity. A hard shift to third made the engine whine, and Caldwell wheeled strongly into the corner. "What the hell is he doing?" shouted Cole. Dan Mitchell saw it too, and all he could do was stare in disbelief. Where the road went straight, Caldwell bent the Challenger into a hard right turn, his Dodge beginning to leave the highway at breakneck speed. Fulminating clouds of dust kicked up from the tremendous forward momentum of the Dodge as it carved tracks in the dirt. "Bobby!" screamed Cole, honking his horn like artillery blasts. "Bobby, no!" Caldwell sensed the drastic change of surface from smooth pavement to lumpy dirt, and he grabbed the wheel aggressively, fighting to control his car. The Challenger would have nothing of it. The rear axle commenced a fishtail, a sliding fury of spinning gears and turning cogs. Caldwell careened out of control. As if seized upon by a ghostly hand, the steering wheel spun with violence, snapping free from his grip. Headlights, taillights, headlights, taillights. Caldwell wiped out at incredible speed. Cole and Mitchell slowed their cars, bringing them both to the curb where Caldwell departed the blacktop seconds before. Camaro and Mustang engines fell to idle, and Mitchell exited, followed by Cole. Between the swirls of dust, they gazed at piles of busted cars that lay strewn. The wrecked bodies stretched beyond the horizon, empty silhouettes of Detroit iron in the twilight, resting in this automotive graveyard. The makes and models spanned decades, displaying designs not seen on the road for generations. Many of them rested on their sides and roofs, having rolled in violent crashes or smashed into other derelicts. Frames twisted and sheet metal imploded, destroying their occupants. "What the hell happened here?" said Mitchell, his voice stammering at the carnage. "Whatever it was, it's pretty awful," said Cole. He scanned the area for Caldwell. When the dust cleared, Cole spotted the Challenger way beyond the wreckage. Caldwell and his Challenger had settled in a vacant spot near the smashed body of a 1950 Ford. The Challenger's headlights illuminated the area, casting frightening shadows toward Mitchell and Cole, shedding more light on the deadly carnage that lay before them, a cornucopia of destruction. Cole heard a car door squeak, and Caldwell emerged, unscathed but terrified. "Bobby!" shouted Mitchell. "Hey, Caldwell!" shouted Cole. "You still alive?" Mitchell and Cole laughed. "Not funny," yelled Caldwell back at them, his voice small and insignificant in the distance. Caldwell took a hard appraisal of what he had done and realized that he had driven right off of the highway. But the road turned. It had to turn. He saw the curve and his eyes didn't lie. He did a walk-around of the Challenger, its engine at idle now, and he inspected for damage. The car was filthy but damage-free. Satisfied, Caldwell got back in and slowly motored between several wrecks he diverted with the slightest of driving skill and the greatest of luck. Cole walked beyond the shoulder into the automotive dead zone and inspected one of the ruins. He kicked at the driver's door and it swung open. The cabin was empty. No skeleton, no rotting carrion, but faint blood spatter colored the headliner and door panels. The blood lay thick in the fabric. Time blunted the texture and color, but no mistaking that whoever bled out took their last ride in this jalopy. Caldwell reached the shoulder and parked the Challenger, leaving the engine on. He took no chances in case something supernatural decided to leverage its powers to destroy them, something wicked like a banshee. "How could this have happened?" asked Caldwell. "You tell me," said Mitchell. "We were right behind you and watched you drive right off the road for no reason. The road runs straight here, but you were driving like it curved." "It did curve," insisted Caldwell. "I saw the turn with my own eyes." Cole, with a hand to his chin, paced back 200 feet away from the men and studied the road. His stance shifted from side to side, and in so doing, he noticed something curious. At one angle, the road appeared straight. A slight shift in perception, just a bend in the knee, made it curve sharply right. But only one road led the way to victory. The overturned wreckage off to the shoulder gave clear and convincing proof on that point. "Caldwell, Mitchell, check this out!" Dan Mitchell and Bobby Caldwell broke into a brisk walk toward Cole. "Stand here and do this," said Cole, demonstrating. Mitchell, then Caldwell, shifted back and forth at the designated spot and saw the illusion. Caldwell angled back and forth, changing the illusion from straight to curved, depending on a slight variance to where he stood. How was it possible for there to be such a deception? It defied all natural laws, but Caldwell saw it, so he had no choice but to believe it. "This explains a lot of why the road is so dangerous," said Caldwell. "It's like a house of mirrors. What's real and what isn't all depends on your point of view." "Literally," said Mitchell. "This place stinks of death," said Cole. "What about the race?" Mitchell asked. "Oh, it's still on. Wouldn't let a little thing like this stop us now, would we, Dan?" Mitchell flinched at Steve's bar, but then stood his ground. "Hell no," said Mitchell. "Don't you hear my Z28 over there? She's going to spank that boss Mustang of yours." "A car that spanks. Kinky car. I like that," said Cole. "But in reality, it's the boss that spanks the secretary's car, and your Camaro does look like a secretary's car, right?" Mitchell rolled his eyes at Cole. "Ironic words coming from someone who owns a Mustang, the very definition of a secretary's car," said Mitchell. "I think Hicks has spanked us all," said Caldwell. "He has to be miles ahead by now." Caldwell shifted one more time, recreating the illusion that nearly did him in, and speculated in his mind what other bizarre phenomena lay in wait. Perhaps Hicks fell prey to a trap far worse just a few miles up the highway. Caldwell turned his thoughts to his lost friend Wesley. Maybe Wesley met his fate here among the scattered wreckage, or maybe something more diabolical further up the road. Caldwell could only hope that his friend Wesley had made it out alive and succeeded in California. "Forget Hicks and screw the rules. This is every man for himself," said Cole. "We've all had hardships in life, and each one of us always made it through. We have good survival instincts. We must have. If we didn't, we wouldn't be alive and talking on this dead road, would we?" Steve drew in a breath and looked down the highway. "Hicks might win, or he might lose. We'll only know at the finish line, and that's where I'm heading." Cole started walking briskly to his idling Boss 302. Caldwell and Mitchell followed in lockstep. "Gentlemen, this is going to be a Le Mans start," said Cole, standing in the midst of rumbling V8s. "We each run to our cars, jump in, and floor it. Let the rubber burn, men." "Agreed," said Mitchell. "Agreed," said Caldwell. The men lined up next to their rides. "On the count of 3, we go," said Caldwell. "Who does the count?" asked Cole. "Wait, do you hear that?" said Mitchell. "Hear what?" said Caldwell. A gentle whistling made its presence known. The men stood by their cars, anesthetized by the unusual tone. The whistle grew louder and was headed their way. In seconds, a misshapen shadow defined itself in the distance, a horrible wraith coming for them. "To hell with counting," shouted Cole. "Let's get out of here," shouted Mitchell. The men jumped into their cars, and in scant seconds Cole got the lead on them, peeling a patch of rubber on the asphalt, leaving a fog of white smoke behind. The Mustang's tachometer hit the red line and screamed with confidence down the uncertain road. Mitchell and Caldwell moved with equal agility, slamming doors, buckling belts, and engaging gears. The shadow stopped at the road, refusing to tread upon the asphalt, and grew tiny in the rearview mirrors. "Let's finish this race," said Caldwell, staring at the reflected shadow while taking a fast and final appraisal of the strewn wreckage. He bid the automotive graveyard farewell with a shift to second gear. The Challenger pulled hard, shoving Caldwell into his seat and shoving the scattered wrecks into the rear view along with the entity. Wherever Wesley was or might be, Caldwell would complete this race in memory of his friend. Mitchell's Camaro followed suit, melting tread marks into the pavement to catch up. The sound of burning rubber elevated Mitchell's feeling of dread, an exponential terror rising within at the sight of the appalling shadow, its whistling angry cry ripping through the night. Mitchell wondered how much worse it could get. He had to pull it together or lose his mind. Over the tormented wail of RPMs, Cole made additional mental calculations. 3 left to defeat, but maybe only 2. Out there somewhere, Hicks was running hard or not running at all. 3 left, maybe 2. He watched his friendly adversaries, Dodge and Chevrolet, riding his bumper, while Hicks and that damn Superbird didn't even register a blip on the radar screen of competition. Cole considered his rivals and thought about the road. Not only was he competing against some of the best auto racers from the region, he was combating the road too. Hypervigilance and driver skill together would keep him alive to win the prize. Mitchell engaged Caldwell in a road duel, the Camaro and Challenger chasing Cole while tugging at each other for position. One side of Mitchell wanted this mad race to be over, but not so fast, said the speed demon that had awakened inside the second hemisphere of his brain. A blistering white flame flared up somewhere within Mitchell, and the ardor of competition consumed him. The desire to win churned like molten lava, motivating him onward. Mitchell had been a very aggressive racer in his glory days, and his flamboyance was not soon forgotten. There was big prize money on the table here tonight, and to capture the cash would restore some of his former confidence. Maybe then he'd have more success with the ladies like he did many years ago. Money went a long way to enhance his life, and 25 grand could buy affection, if not for all eternity, at least for a while. Finishing in victory lane would give him bragging rights and the needed edge to find what he craved. Mitchell watched the rival Challenger go head-to-head with the Boss 302. In a blink of time, the Challenger grazed Cole's bumper and scraped the chrome, weaving side to side, trying to pass the Boss. "You think so?" said Cole, and countervailed to block the pass, swerving the rear in a dance with the Dodge. Caldwell decided if he couldn't pass on the blacktop, he'd do so on the shoulder once more and launched his Challenger into the dirt and gravel. The move surprised Cole, and he backed off in fear of starting a chain of collisions that would wipe them all out. Caldwell took the lead and skidded back to the road. Mitchell filled in the gap left by Caldwell, and it was Boss Mustang and Z28 Camaro again, battling for position in a classic Ford Chevy fight. The Challenger stretched out its lead, and Caldwell watched his opponents shrink. The terrain, once sandy and flat, turned jagged and mountainous. A blood moon rose over the highway and cast its rarefied red beams to the asphalt. The highway cut a path between dramatic cliffs of rock, and 187 narrowed to a point where the shoulder sheared away, leaving only a narrow ribbon of pavement in which to navigate. Caldwell was boxed in with no margin for error. Surrounded by steep cliffs, the contours of the highway began to wriggle and wind, making the bulky Challenger's suspension tilt in the turns. The straight-line dodge lacked the optimal suspension for such curves, and the twisting road allowed Mustang and Camaro to catch up. The even weight distribution of their road racing suspensions and lighter unit bodies served Ford and Chevrolet well. Caldwell looked ahead to the rocky, jagged tips capped with snow that grew like rows of shark's teeth before him. The men drove on toward the jaws, a one-way trip into the mouth of the unknown. Mitchell, Caldwell, and Cole no longer concerned themselves about the danger, each fully engaged, focusing their road racing finesse toward victory and the prize. Caldwell saw at first a diamond-shaped blur flanked by flashing lights. It whizzed past his periphery. What did it say? The paint was faded, and he barely caught the illustration, but it appeared to warn of falling rocks. Cole and Mitchell saw it too, and honked their horns at Caldwell to warn him. A faint ping sounded on the Challenger's hood. What was that? Caldwell had his foot in it, doing almost 90 miles per hour on the hairy twists. The object blew off the hood quicker than Caldwell could see. Ping, ping again. Caldwell perceived detritus striking the hood and now the roof of his car. Were they hailstones? Falling ice pellets? Worse yet, falling rock, as the diamond-shaped sign seemed to suggest? Caldwell slowed the Challenger to a more sane speed before he cracked a windshield. Ping, ping, ping. What the? Said Caldwell, astounded. Ping, 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 followed by a monstrous boom. A human skull fell on the hood and vibrated up against the Challenger's windshield. The hollow socket stared at Caldwell, and the teeth chattered over the sheet metal before the skull rattled off to the pavement. Caldwell gasped, unable to find words to reflect his astonishment. A multitude of human bones rained down on the Challenger now, noisy calcified remains denting the bodywork. Femurs, rib cages, and pelvic bones pelted the Mustang and Camaro too, in a macabre storm of doom. Skulls that missed the cars struck the road hard, cracking open with the sound of spilling marbles, a dazzling display of death. Caldwell looked more closely at the cliff walls on either side. They were chalky white and stacked to the peaks with compacted human remains. The hair on Robert's neck tingled, and his stomach bubbled with a mixture of awe and primordial fear. Onward he motored at the speed of a pace car on a caution lap. Cole and Mitchell trailed in tow, wondering when this death slide would end. Mitchell pulled up next to Cole and yelled out the window, "We're in hell, and if this isn't hell, we're going straight there after the race. I should never have let you talk me into it, Steve. Never." Mitchell was hot with anger. "Just shut up and drive through. It'll have to stop somewhere," said Cole. "It'll stop at our tombstone," said Mitchell. This is a sign we're going to die." "Shut up and drive," said Cole, rolling up his window, not wanting to hear any more. But Cole was feeling it, the fear, the terror, the sense of impending doom. For once he thought Mitchell might be right. He checked his odometer, nearly 50 miles into the race, almost to the halfway point. There would be no purpose in turning back now. Cole made a promise to himself that if he made it out, he would never speak to anyone about what he saw. Not anyone, not ever. The rain of bones abated as Caldwell led the group past the remaining cliffs to open plains once more. Caldwell pulled his car to the shoulder and got out. Cole and Mitchell parked behind him, white-knuckled and faces ashen. Caldwell breathed heavily, leaning against the driver's fender. The blood moon appeared large in the horizon, an angry celestial entity, a conspirator to their ultimate destruction. "Can anyone tell me what just happened?" said Caldwell. Cole opened his door and exited, walking toward the Challenger. "Man, your bodywork is trashed. It looks like you left her in the middle of a golf driving range for the day." Caldwell scrutinized the river of dents that flowed over the bodywork, cascading from the roof and hood, running down the sides of the car like a demented waterfall of destruction. "My car's totally ruined. A write-off," said Caldwell. He groaned like a terminal patient in a hospice ward. "Hey man, our cars are trashed too," said Cole. "Look," he said, pointing to the beat-up Camaro and Mustang. "Let's finish the race. We've gone past the point of no return. Let's do it." "I agree," said Mitchell. "I didn't want this race to begin with, but like Steve said, now we're gone past the point of no return. And our cars, well, let's say we're not going to win the Pebble Beach Concours d'Elegance, not that they'd have us anyway. Let's finish this race down and dirty, fender rubbing and scraping, the whole bit. It won't matter now." Caldwell took deep breaths, still recovering from the surreal landslide of minutes before. "I want to know what that was back there," he insisted. "I mean, what the hell?" His voice crackled like a boy in the early stages of puberty. "Do you really want to go back and find out?" asked Cole. "Does it matter what it was or why?" "I'll tell you what it was," said Mitchell. "It was unbelievable, and I'm still not sure it really happened." "I'm sure it happened," said Caldwell. "Look at my car." He cleared off a piece of a clavicle bone lodged in the gap between his hood and the windshield. He looked at the bone and threw it away in disgust. "Hey, easy," said Steve. "That might have been somebody's grandma." "Yeah, funny," said Caldwell. "Well, now we know that the rumors were true," said Steve. "I stand corrected for my earlier assessment of this highway. Mitchell, I owe you an apology." Cole patted Dan Mitchell on the back. "Apology accepted," said Mitchell. "And I swear that if we make it out, I'll never let you talk me into anything as stupid as this again. My racing days are done." "We'll see you change your tune once you're in the lap of safety," said Cole. "Well, gentlemen, I believe we have a race to finish. That is, if Hicks hasn't already finished it for us." "It ain't over till it's over," said Caldwell. "I know I'll be using the prize money to put my Challenger in shape again. That'll put me back at zero, almost as if I never entered this damn race, and that would be fine by me." "Let's roll," said Cole. "This time be careful out there, gentlemen. There are going to be things ahead that no one should ever have to witness. I'd bet my life on it." "Looks like we all bet our lives on it," said Mitchell. Cole gave Mitchell a smirk and went back to his ride. Mitchell and Caldwell followed suit, and they all merged back onto 187, bringing the mini freight train of American muscle up to speed. The blood moon vanished from sight, obscured by cloud cover, and the road ahead turned onyx black, melding horizon and asphalt into a solid field of darkness. Caldwell flicked on his high beams. The center line provided a measure of comfort to Caldwell because it suggested human involvement, a man-made pathfinder out from this nightmare. Wesley was somewhere on this road. His bones were out there. Caldwell could sense it. Poor Matt. Why did Matt do it? Why did his friend flirt with the Reaper's scythe? Now Caldwell found himself doing the very same. Caldwell led the way, a vanguard through the blackness, while Mitchell and Cole raced on his tail. The bright glow of headlights in Caldwell's mirrors hypnotized him as he wheeled the Challenger into meandering curves at high speed. The old Dodge, her body cosmetically spoiled, still responded undeterred by the skin damage. The soul of the car was still present, and it would take more than cracking bones to beat it out of the chassis. "Don't you worry, baby girl. I'll have you fixed up in no time." The word baby girl reminded him of Susie, and his thoughts turned to his family. He wanted to see them if but for one more time. He had to survive. The money was secondary. In the far distance, Caldwell saw pulsing amber lights. His velocity read in the triple digits, and he let off the throttle in fearful anticipation of what lay ahead. He drew closer to the lights, and a warning sign materialized between the flashes, showing a divided road. He checked ahead as far as he could see, searching for a dividing median strip, but saw none. The four headlights from Cole's Boss 302 distracted Caldwell, and he checked his mirrors. The Mustang threatened to make a competitive pass on the outside lane. "Better not try that one, Steve," said Caldwell. "You don't know where that pass will lead you." If the flashing warning was any indicator, the road was about to divide with a concrete median at any second. The splash of the Challenger's headlights sprayed out into the distance, and at 100+ on this road, he was driving beyond the reach of his high beams. Ahead, sure enough, a concrete strip rose up like the bony spine of a dinosaur, splitting the road. "Oh, wow!" exclaimed Caldwell. The highway split off not into two roads, but into four, each heading off in a separate direction like the tributaries of an evil river. "Which way?" mouthed Caldwell over the blast of his engine. He had to decide fast because the branches of 187 were coming upon him with frightful haste. He downshifted to third, affording a fractional opportunity to assess his situation. The tachometer needle blipped toward the red line, then settled to more sane revolutions, calming the unbridled power of the engine. Caldwell made a wild guess and decided to follow the direction pointed by the tachometer needle. Only a twisted logic could ever apply to the otherworldliness of 187. Any road science that humankind once engineered into this highway had been absorbed and bent by the road's evil character. Never more would pure logic or hard science govern the physics of this highway. Caldwell made his choice and turned the taut wheel a few degrees counterclockwise, taking aim for the road furthest left. The Dodge Challenger responded like an obedient dog and pointed its nose with quick precision. The engine surged, and Caldwell sensed an immediate loss of traction. The ever-constant center line of the road abruptly disappeared, and the Challenger's headlights hunted for the safety of the white stripe, but the white stripe was no more. The front end of the Dodge went into a steep dive, the headlights now pointing into an abyss. Caldwell plunged in free flight, swallowed whole by a gorge of unfathomable depth. Cole and Mitchell skidded to a halt short of the forks in 187 and watched their friends' taillights disappear. "No way!" shouted Caldwell. His descent lasted a virtual lifetime, and he made peace with his soul in those remaining few seconds. 2,000 feet below, the nose of the Challenger disintegrated against a cruel rocky outcrop, and a sonic boom echoed off of the cavern walls. Mitchell and Cole rushed to the edge. The Challenger's engine surged for a moment, and then a ball of flame rose up, transporting black clouds of smoke amidst the fire. "Stay back," said Cole. In less than a minute, the smell of gasoline and burning rubber stung their noses, and the smoke burned their eyes. They stared down at the chasm in disbelief. The flames of Caldwell's wreckage illuminated a hollow cavern of countless smashed cars below. The fire from the Challenger quickly died and returned the rocky fissure to obscure blackness. The blood moon reappeared in the night sky, casting homicidal rays of red upon the spectacle. Both Cole and Mitchell returned a horrific stare to each other. "He's gone," said Mitchell, wiping his cheek with a shirt sleeve. "Gone," said Cole. "He didn't even have a chance." "So what the hell do we do?" asked Mitchell. "We're doomed if we go any further. And I bet Hicks never made it out the other side either. He's probably down there somewhere with Caldwell. We're all going to die." "To hell we are," said Cole. "We have to finish this race more now than ever. Otherwise it makes a mockery of what Caldwell did, of what we all did." By the light of the blood moon, Mitchell studied the gaping valley that ended Caldwell's life. "Look," he pointed. Cole turned his attention to the road and watched the pavement reconstitute itself, asphalt sealing over the plunging cavity that swallowed Caldwell. It became Route 187 again, rolling along like a regular highway, the solid white stripe passing right over the death pit, the asphalt continuing without interruption. "Unreal," said Cole. He positioned his stance to the three other feeder lanes and saw the same thing, continuous uninterrupted passage. "Now what?" said Mitchell. "All these roads look safe, but we know they're not. What do we do now?" Cole stooped and grabbed some rocks. "Here, take these," he said, handing Mitchell some stones. The two men began rolling pebbles along the road next to the one that ended Caldwell's life. The pebbles rolled and sounded off, skipping down one of the devious asphalt tributaries. Cole and Mitchell advanced and threw more, listening for the reassuring sound of rocks grating along the pavement. Again they would advance and throw more, listening and watching pebbles roll along the asphalt. This road looked solid. Mitchell threw another, and they trained their attention on the stone like predatory birds. It rolled for several feet, making a click-click. Then the road opened up, devouring the stone. They paused, and after several seconds the stone reverberated off the wall of another cliff. The road soon resealed itself just like the other, until it appeared solid and trustworthy in the most deceptive of manners. "We obviously can't believe anything we see," said Cole. "Two down," said Mitchell. "Let's go to the next road." Mitchell walked with Cole to the third tier of Route 187 and skipped some rocks along the asphalt. They stopped and listened, then advanced and threw more. They moved in increments, several feet at a time, throwing rocks and listening. Mitchell threw a few more stones and watched in amazement. The rocks disappeared, absorbed into a black wall that materialized in the middle of the road, blocking further access. The wall rippled with waves that looked like water in reaction to the rocks thrown. "Look at that," said Mitchell. "I see it," said Cole. Mitchell threw another rock and it skipped, echoing off the asphalt, bouncing into the barrier and vanished. The noise abruptly halted, like the rock had entered another realm of existence. The two men walked up to the reflective liquid and regarded their faces staring back at them. Simultaneously, they could see the backdrop of the highway, as if they could drive right through the wall, but the stones they threw were gone. "What are we dealing with?" asked Mitchell. "I don't know," said Cole. Steve motioned to put his hand into the reflective liquid. A persuasive force tugged on his hand, drawing it closer to the reflection. Dan Mitchell seized Cole's arm. "Don't," said Mitchell. He took the rocks from Cole's hand and threw them into the liquid pool, and they vanished. "Some things are better left undiscovered," said Mitchell. "Come on, let's check the other road, and if it checks out, then we'll be on our way." The men moved on to test the fourth road, and for a good 100 yards it proved passable. "This one's safe," said Cole. "As far as we can tell," said Mitchell. "Let's get our cars and get the hell out of here," said Cole, leading the way back to their rides. "And what about Caldwell? Doesn't he deserve a decent burial?" "He had his burial. It may not be decent, but I'm not going down there to find his charred remains. Are you?" "At least we should give him a moment of silence. He deserves that, at least," insisted Mitchell. Cole bowed his head for a short 5 seconds. "Are you satisfied? We may already have lost the race to Hicks, but if not, I plan to be in the winner's circle at the end." The burn of the chase had dwindled in Dan Mitchell's chest, the lust for victory dissipating from his body. This race smelled of rotting death. He wondered how he got here. He'd heard the stories and the legends. He'd known the risks, and still he challenged the road with reckless abandon. US 187 was a meat processing plant, never letting anything go to waste, not even human souls. Everything got consumed. This road was going to kill him and eat his soul. Mitchell knew this now, but now was too late. He had to finish what he started. "Let's round him up," said Cole. He got in the boss and goosed the throttle. The Mustang threw powerful revs, impervious and unfeeling to the danger and the tragedy surrounding it. But that was the benefit of being metal and moving parts, the advantage of being inanimate. Nothing could scare it. Nothing could make it quit and turn away from the peril. The car felt nothing for anything or anyone. Mitchell's Camaro complied with equal impunity, ready to race to death and destruction if necessary. It all depended on the navigator behind the wheel. It all depended on Mitchell. Ford Mustang and Chevy Camaro rolled forward, taking the fourth, less dangerous road, gaining speed. The highway basked in the glow of high-beam headlights, Cole and Mitchell driving nose to tail. The Mustang cut a swath through the night, its 4 headlights burning like the cool white gases of a starlit sky. At 120-plus miles per hour, the character of Route 187 changed rapidly and seemed to almost disappear beneath them. A fine mist had settled over the road. It hovered at ground level, making the harsh black asphalt disappear, transformed into soft white vapors. The Mustang made a pattern in the mist, spreading the vapors wide, and made them rise to the level of Mitchell's windshield. Cole's thoughts turned to his wife. They'd been married many years. How many was it? 24, give or take, maybe more. What kind of a husband had he been throughout those years? Had he loved her enough? The passion and the pleasure were intense during the honeymoon stage, but that died down with time like an archaic law that nobody remembered, the archaic law of marriage. People grew tired of each other. Sure, it was inevitable, but was it irreversible? Had he really loved his wife all those years, or had it become a stale marriage of convenience? The roar of the Mustang's 302 engine raged on in apathy to his thoughts. He struggled to be intellectually honest with himself, and the next question was upon him faster than the red line of his engine. He hadn't always shown it, but he loved Carol. Now he had to ask himself whether she loved him in return, or had it all been an act. He reasoned it out. She stayed where others might have left, true. She persisted through the good times and the bad, also true. They always made up after a fight. Her kisses tingled and danced on his lips every morning. The thing spoke for itself. He didn't consider the question any further, as the evidence was clear and convincing. Funny, he hadn't thought about her in such terms for a long time. Why had it come up now? The urgency to see Carol swelled in his heart. He needed to tell her how he felt. Why hadn't he told her before the race? It was the stupid road. It sucked him in, dwarfing all other priorities. Win or lose, he had to finish this race. He needed to stay frosty if he was going to survive. Mitchell's Camaro dogged Cole's rear bumper. Far ahead, a big lump appeared in Cole's field of vision. The lump sat off to the shoulder, and before long it became apparent. Abandoned tractor-trailer. Ford and Chevy blasted past the old relic at high speed. As the semi grew smaller, Mitchell saw a pair of headlights switch on and begin to move. Mitchell knew this could not be a good thing, and if it wasn't a good thing, it could only be a frigging horrible thing. Mitchell kept a stiff boot to it, hard on the taillights of Cole's snorting horse. Mitchell and Cole moved at a blistering pace, yet the dim headlights behind the Camaro were getting brighter and larger. Mitchell heard the grind of a diesel engine and the ominous roll of 18 wheels. How was it possible that a semi could keep up to the speed of a muscle car? He thought he heard the whine of forced induction. Anything was possible on Highway 187, and Mitchell knew not to waste his time searching his soul for explanations. The only answer he needed now was how to survive. The thing that rolled behind him had one priority, and that could only be to annihilate anything living. Mitchell sounded his horn at Cole and flashed his brights. Cole saw the semi too, and his terror escalated in tandem with his speed. The two men ran nearly flat out, having nothing more to squeeze from their engines without driving beyond the limits of the road. The big rig rolled like a supercharged steamroller, a mechanized demon commandeered by a renegade escapee from hell's insane asylum. The headlights were sharp in Mitchell's eyes, so close that Mitchell could smell death, making the fear of doom exude from his pores. The tractor-trailer let out a blast of its air horns, and the screech sounded like the Cretaceous cry of something awful. Mitchell felt his right foot touch the floor as he rode Cole's bumper in the right lane. The trailer swerved to the opposite lane and pulled up beside Mitchell. The noise from the truck delivered excruciating pain to Mitchell's ears. Mitchell squinted to see who was driving it. A fetid creature occupied the driver's seat. It looked like the remains of a bad genetic experiment, a cross between man and beast, the huge bony head resembling a crocodilian skull perched upon a human torso. Mitchell's blood crystallized in his veins. The semi took a swipe at the Camaro, and the monstrosity behind the wheel let out a hellish roar. Mitchell weaved a desperate countersteer into his technique and avoided contact. He gave a sharp stab to the throttle and managed to pull ahead of the semi. Cole dripped with sweat at the sight of this diabolical rig attempting to stomp Mitchell out of existence. Cole knew with Mitchell gone he would be next. Cole buried the speedometer needle in a frantic effort to give Mitchell space to escape. The three vehicles drove in unison, none of them able to outrun the other. This continued for several minutes before the character of the road changed once more. The straight line mutated into a worm of writhing curves and twists. The zigzagging curves scrubbed speed off of the semi and subdued the threat. Mustang and Camaro formed a tight bubble of speed and pulled away from the tractor-trailer. The beast behind the wheel shook its bony-clad fist at them, letting blast with the air horns again. "Bring it on!" shouted Cole. "Bring it!" The twisty asphalt gave Cole and Mitchell the necessary purchase to put some distance between them and the vile creature. Around the next sweeping turn, Cole saw it first, and then Mitchell. The road straightened, not a curve to be seen for several miles into the void. It disturbed the men in a most undesirable and uninviting way. "Damn it," said Mitchell. The semi's lights a good mile off grew once more in Mitchell's rear view, and the sensation of doom loomed in Mitchell's heart. The air horns announced the advancing wheels of destruction, and the semi pulled up on Mitchell's bumper, ramming the Camaro hard. The Z-28 lost rear traction, but Mitchell recovered. All Steve Cole could do was view the carnage unfold through his mirrors and watch his friend drive through what might be his last ride. "Come on, Mitchell, keep with me," said Cole. The Camaro's headlights diminished in size, and Cole realized it wasn't the Boss 302 that got faster. He knew that Mitchell had fallen off the pace. "Stay with me, buddy," said Cole in subdued tones. Smaller and fainter became the Camaro's headlights. In an instant, the spray of Mitchell's high beams flashed 3 times, then winked out. Mitchell fought to control the spin, but his car turned like a gyroscope. Mitchell saw the skeletal demon glare at him from the high seat of the semi, a reptilian grimace cast upon its crocodilian skull. The tractor-trailer slammed the unsettled Camaro again, making the Z-28 flip onto its roof. The Z-28 twirled like a top, and gasoline spilled from the Camaro's back end. The pungent scent of aromatic hydrocarbons filled Mitchell's nose, and gasoline flooded the interior, staining the headlighter. The semi did a U-turn and idled its way over to the smashed Camaro. The creature stuck its long and powerful snout out the window and hissed. The creature's skull blazed red under the blood moon, and its crooked teeth gleamed at Mitchell. At once it belched a stream of fire from its jaws, igniting the gas-soaked interior of Mitchell's Camaro. The Camaro became a funeral pyre, and Dan Mitchell's body lit up with a flash. Cole's mirrors flared with a bright orange fireball, and he clamped on the brakes. The Boss 302 ground to a stop, and Cole gaped, transfixed at the reflection, too terrified to actually look back and see with true eyes the burning of his old friend. Cole's heart galloped in his chest. Cole nailed the throttle and turned the wheel sharp left. The Mustang fishtailed with unquestioning compliance, turned 180 degrees to point at the ruination of Dan Mitchell. Cole doused his headlights and watched. The semi let out a blast of the air horns and began shifting gears away from the fresh destruction, headed away from Cole and his Boss 302. Cole hesitated and waited until the semi's red taillights were nothing more than pinpricks into the blackness. He put the Mustang in gear and rushed to the scene. The flames licked at the Camaro's once glossy paint job, turning everything to carbon. Cole pulled up alongside the intense heat and got out. He opened the driver's door to the Camaro with a gloved hand, and Dan Mitchell spilled out onto the ground, still alive and trying to speak. "Looks like I lost," said Mitchell. Tendrils of smoke rose from his hair and clothing. Cole pulled Dan away from the burning car, and some of the skin on Mitchell's hand came off. Mitchell screamed, and Cole recoiled in horror, dropping the peeled skin to the ground. Cole accelerated the rescue effort and pulled his friend by the arms, bringing Mitchell closer to safety. Scorch marks dotted Mitchell's arms like the bruised needle holes of a drug addict, and his tattered pant legs smoldered with the threat of further combustion. The intense heat from the conflagration had severely burned Mitchell's lungs, and the mere act of breathing caused him unquantifiable pain. Dan Mitchell's face looked like the skin of a blistered hot dog. The horrid red and black burns contrasted to the fear in his green eyes. "I don't want to die," said Mitchell. "You're going to make it, buddy. I need to get you to a hospital. You're going to make it, Dan." When a man is dying, he generally knows it. All the futile words of comfort from bystanders and misleading notions about making it don't really seem to matter. There is something in the mind, or maybe it's the human spirit, that tells a man his time has come. That spirit was talking to Dan Mitchell now, letting him know in loud and painful ways that his life was over. "Well, at least I died doing what I loved," said Mitchell in shallow breaths. "You're not dead, you're alive!" Mitchell's eyes rolled back, and he let out a gentle exhalation of air. His body went limp, and all cessation of movement seized upon him. Cole shook Mitchell as if to rouse him from a deep sleep. "Dan! Stay with me! Dan!" Cole gently let go, resting Dan's body over the sandy soil. A stream of tears trickled over Steve's face. Steve and Cole cried into the night. "I'll get you for this," he said. "You hear me? I'll get you." His words of rage thinned into the blackness. Cole waited for a response or a signal of impending retaliation from the road. Out of the darkness came nothing, only the smiling and malevolent moon with its outrageous color. Steve sat with Mitchell and watched the fire eat the remains of the Z-28. Cole brooded over the loss of his friend, but he had an idea. He picked up Mitchell's charred body and carried him back to the Mustang. He placed Mitchell in the back over the fold-down rear seat. "You'll finish this race, Dan. You'll be right in the winner's circle with me." Cole slammed the shifter in gear and wheeled away from the wreckage, pouring on the steam. The Mustang's engine blared in anger at the atrocity left behind. Cole checked for any signs of the tractor-trailer. There were none. He drove flat out, taking the revs near red line, and barreled down the highway at 140-plus miles per hour. He passed many scenes of wasted wrecks off to both sides of the road. He saw decayed remains of people still in their seats, hands at the wheel, fully intent on leaving this roadside cemetery. Cole vowed he would not end up like them, not like Mitchell or Caldwell, and maybe Hicks. How was he going to explain what happened? People would ask questions. Where's Bobby Caldwell? Where's Dan Mitchell? Where's Hicks? How would he respond? He didn't know and didn't want to know. These were problems he wished to have because being asked such questions meant that he made it out alive. Cole wondered in his solitude what lay in wait for him, the blast from the Mustang's exhaust giving him no answer except a hot and calculated voice that demanded victory. What cunning methods sprawled before him, deadly spring traps laid by the road to remove him from this world. There was no way to know until the problem was upon him. He wanted to win the race, but dying wasn't worth it. He let off the throttle and took the car down to 120 miles per hour. The landscape zipped by at a searing pace, despite the speed adjustment, rough edges and outlines of darkness whipping past with their nondescript shadows. How far was it to the end? It couldn't be that far. He was at least 60 miles, maybe 70 miles in. Would Hicks be there at the finish line, perched atop his hood? If Hicks had failed to finish, then who was he racing against? Stephen Cole appraised his actions and came to one conclusion, the only conclusion that fit. It had all been his fault. He'd driven Mitchell to run this race, knowing of the rumors, the legends, and the dangers, but refusing to believe. Mitchell was right. Someone was going to lose their life on this road. Mitchell must have known all along, or at least suspected he would die. He wanted to die doing what he loved, and he succeeded. But Cole was still alive, his heart beating steady, and the engine to his boss Mustang thumping with thunder. "I bet I can make it," said Cole. "I bet you can't," whispered a phantom voice. Cole saw Dan Mitchell sitting upright in the back seat, staring with blood-red eyes. Mitchell stretched out a hand and placed it on Cole's shoulder. "You're going to die on this road," said Mitchell. Mitchell's hand burned like hell's fire, and Cole recoiled from the carbonizing touch, letting go the steering wheel to push away the smoldering fingers of his friend. In doing so, the boss veered off the solid asphalt and hit dirt. Clouds of dust rose into the air, and Cole panicked, jamming the brakes hard. This sent him into a powerful slide. When the Mustang came to rest, Cole snapped off his seatbelt and bolted from the car. The headlights shot gloomy beams through the settling dust, and Cole came back to the driver's door with measured steps. In the back seat lay the corpse of Dan Mitchell, unmoved from the spot where Steve had placed his friend. Cole flipped back the bucket seat and pushed on Mitchell. The body shifted like jelly and stopped. Cole gave another prod, causing the same reaction in Mitchell. Steve checked his own shoulder and touched it for damage. He sensed no burning and felt no pain. But this was ridiculous. He heard Mitchell talk. He saw him. He felt the burn of Mitchell's touch. Cole returned his eyes to Dan. The body lay over the rear seat, immobilized by the certain hand of death. Cole laughed. Just another setback from this insane race. Steve Cole hopped into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and popped the clutch, stirring more dirt, merging back to the road. Cole passed a sign that read 25 miles to Moran Junction and knew he was close to the end now. Route 187 concluded at the junction of US 87. That much he remembered. That was common knowledge. He bet Hicks would be waiting there, perched on the hood of his Superbird, gloating over the victory with majestic mountains as its backdrop. But what if Hicks had fallen victim like the others? Cole asked himself again if he'd go back and save him like they had all agreed, that no one got left behind. No way, not a chance. If he got out of here alive, he'd never go back. To go back was suicide. The tractor-trailer might be waiting for him or something worse. Cole jammed the throttle hard, opening up the boss for a sprint to the finish and get the hell off this highway never to return. At his current rate of speed, Cole estimated he would be at the end of this cursed highway in a matter of 10 minutes. Those 10 minutes ticked with excruciating lethargy. Cole saw the ghosts of the damned flanking either side of the road. He saw a landscape that resembled the asphodel meadows of Hades, lost souls walking without purpose, without desire. There were thousands of these apparitions, so many that they spilled out to the shoulders of 187, walking like hitchhikers of the damned, trying to solicit a ride from Cole to remove themselves from this eternal limbo. Cole kept driving, refusing to acknowledge their presence. They called to him by name, a ghostly choir repeating their pleas for redemption over and over again. "Stop!" exclaimed Cole. "All of you, stop!" He let off the throttle and downshifted, slowing the Mustang. His headlights sprayed optimistic light to the intersection ahead. The tortured souls fell silent and began to fade from view while the Mustang motored on final approach to the end of the road. Cole scanned ahead for any sign of Hicks, but saw nothing. He felt simultaneous joy at the victory and dismay at the death of his friends. "We made it, Dan. We won," said Cole, releasing his safety belt. Mitchell's body made no answer. The ring of victory sounded hollow in Cole's ears. "We made it," Steve repeated in softer tones. He pulled over to the shoulder and got out, his face wet with tears. Splintered shards of wood lay scattered on the ground at the intersection. A cluster of spent shotgun shells littered the asphalt. Cole saw the inviting word "Enter" lying amid the splinters. He kicked at the painted word in disbelief. To the left was another sign that read "Road closed. Do not enter." That sign was fresh and unmolested, offering a new invitation to run another version of 187. Cole looked to the right and saw the same. US 187 signs sprang up everywhere, arisen from the earth in all directions like fast-sprouting mushrooms. In a panic, Steve considered driving off the road to the nearby field, a dreary field filled with more ghosts, their outstretched arms pleading for Cole to come to them. Cole knew that driving toward these phantoms would mean his death. He wanted to live. His choices were limited. Go back, go forward, turn to the right, turn to the left. His sudden urge to see his wife again drove him mad. Cole made his choice. Chapter 11. "What do we got here?" asked the salvage operator. "Looks abandoned to me," said the tow truck driver. "What'll we do with her?" he asked, leery about the find. "Hook her up," barked the salvager. "I'm keeping this one." "Fine," said the towman. He checked his watch and added, "When I'm done, I'm not waiting around. I'm getting the hell out of here. We shouldn't even be here. This road is closed." He got in the tow truck and reversed toward the relic. The towman checked his watch once more and scrambled to attach the tow tackle to the empty Mustang. The Mustang's bodywork was seriously bruised with dents, but the engine was intact. The tow winch lifted the Mustang's rear end, making her nose point down. "Where do you think the owner is?" asked the towman, handling the controls of the winch. "Oh, somewhere out there," pointed the salvager. "How long do you think this beast has been sitting here?" "Who knows? Weeks? Months? Years? Does it really matter?" "No, I suppose not," said the towman. "I guess the owner's dead." "Do you think?" said the salvager. "This horse looks rough, but she's a rare one. Too good to go to waste out here on a dead highway." He relished his find, mentally soaking up the curvaceous lines and shape of the Boss 302 from every angle. The towman stuck two flashing lights on the hood of the Boss and went to lock off the Mustang's steering wheel. "Hey, the keys are still in the ignition," said the towman. "Are they now?" said the salvager, walking over to inspect for himself. "So they are. I wonder if she'll start." The salvager reached inside, moved the shifter to neutral, and flicked the ignition key. The Mustang turned over once, then died. "Battery's dead," said the towman, looking through the passenger window. The towman reached into the glove box and fished around for the ownership. He seized upon a folded sheet of paper and withdrew it to read aloud. "Says this car was registered to a Stephen Cole. Don't you think we need to notify the next of kin?" "Great, a towman with morals. How often does that happen? But doesn't the family have a right to know?" "They already know. The road ate 'em, and that's that. Just keep quiet about this and there's some money in it for you." The salvager ran his hands along the dented bodywork, dreaming about the restoration that would follow. "No problem," said the towman, slipping the registration into his pocket. They hauled Cole's car from the shoulder of 187, taking her down the highway as the sun began to set. Carol Cole heard a knock at the door. She flicked on her bedroom light and rubbed her eyes. She checked the time. It was late evening, and she'd fallen asleep in front of the television. She put on her slippers and hurried to the door to meet Steve. Why had he disappeared for so long? The race should only have lasted a couple of hours, not 2 days. She peered through the door and saw a shadow outlined by the front porch light. She opened the door with hesitation. "Are you Mrs. Cole?" "Yes, I am," she answered, fear clutching at her throat. "Ma'am, I have something you want," he said. "Who are you?" she asked. "This is the registration that belonged to Stephen Cole. I found it in his abandoned car. We found his Mustang on 187. A shock went through Carol like a lightning bolt. "And?" she questioned with trembling hands. "His vehicle was there. He wasn't. I belong to the cleanup crew. That's all I can tell you." "Where's his car?" "That's all I can tell you. I'm sorry, ma'am." The towman turned and left. Carol held the registration in her hand. Was this all that remained of her husband? Nothing more but a scrap of paper? No more warm embraces, no more kisses, no more Steve. A broken dam of fond memories drenched her mind, and she wailed at the doorstep, her cry resounding throughout the neighborhood. Months went by with no sign of Steve, or even a remote hint that he was alive. Carol Cole held out hope, but hope is a fleeting creature, and when it leaves, despair takes its place. The word was out all over town that US 187 had swallowed them all, Caldwell, Mitchell, Hicks, and Cole, making a meal out of their souls. Carol prayed they were all wrong, that Steve had somehow made it out. She cursed herself for providing him encouragement to run the road. She'd known the risks. She could have stopped him. She could have taken away his keys, but in the end, material gain, a remodeled kitchen drove her decision to let him go. Was that the value she placed on her husband's life? It rained the day she received the letter. She opened it with shaky hands and pulled out the correspondence. "Dear Ms. Cole, after careful investigation and evaluation of your claim for life insurance proceeds stemming from the disappearance of the named insured, your husband Stephen A. Cole, we conclude that since the body has never been recovered, there is no evidence that in fact the named insured is deceased. Our investigation further reveals that Stephen A. Cole was involved in an illegal race on Highway 187. By way of a special exclusionary endorsement on his life insurance policy, there is no coverage for death that occurs on US 187. Therefore, under the cited endorsement to the policy, we must respectfully decline your claim for the $25,000 proceeds from said policy. Very truly yours, William Hipping, the Gallant Insurance Group." Carol held the denial letter in her hands. The paper was cold and wet from the passing storm. The ink of her husband's name smudged to her touch. "Oh, Steve, you can't be dead." She looked out the window to her sedan in the driveway. Alone, and in her silence, she retraced in her mind the route that leads to US 187.